In Bill's movie, Bill Maher's movie, and in Zeitgeist, they go through a litany of gods and goddesses from back in the olden days. And then they declare that, for instance, Mithra was born of a virgin, was born on December 25th, had 12 disciples, performed miracles, was dead for 3 days, was resurrected, and Sunday was the day Mithra was worshipped. They'll also say this about Horus, similar things. Born on December 25th, born of a virgin, had a star in the east that appeared, was adored by 3 kings, was teaching at 12, baptized, and had his ministry at the age of 30, and had 12 disciples. The list goes on. Dionysius, born of a virgin, born on December 25th, performed miracles, was called the King of Kings, was called the Alpha and Omega, and then was resurrected. This list just goes on and on, name after name after name. Now, when you chase down the actual sources of where are the ancient documents that tell them these things about these deities, what you find is that Bill Maher is quoting Zeitgeist. Zeitgeist is quoting another book. That book's quoting another book. These are all modern books. And then that book has no ancient sources of any kind. It's just sort of a long string of one person quoting another who had no original sources. So it's difficult to do research on this because the documents don't exist. They can't be analyzed. But let me go through some details. Mithra, it said, was born of a virgin. This is not true. Mithra emerged fully grown out of a rock wearing a hat. Now, I suppose you could consider a rock, like a stone, a virgin. I suppose you could call it that, but this is obviously not what we mean by virgin birth. Mithra was born on December 25th. Actually, there is no date given anywhere of Mithra's supposed birth. There's just no date given for it. So this just, someone pulled it out of their Mithra. I don't know where they got it from. And then supposedly Mithra had 12 disciples. Actually, he had 1 or 2, depending on which sort of sect or smaller group of Mithraists you belonged to. He had 1 or 2 disciples in particular. He was dead for performed miracles. Mithra is known for one great activity. Over and over again, the pictures of Mithra, the activities of Mithra are seen always doing the same thing. Mithra killed a bull. We're not sure why. Mithra killed a bull. He's known for slaying a bull. This is what Mithra is known for, not for performing specifically miracles, although that would be generic. I wouldn't be surprised if a deity character performed miracles, but Mithra was dead for 3 days. No, Mithra never died. There's no record of Mithra dying. There is just no record. And if there's no record of Mithra dying, there's no source document for that, then it's difficult to have a resurrection, which just seems to have been fabricated. And then finally, Sunday. Mithra was worshipped on Sunday. Now, Christians gathering on the first day of the week, we know that this happened long before actually the Mithraic cult became popular. It didn't actually become popular until the 2nd century AD. But we see Christians gathering on Sunday immediately after the resurrection of Christ, because that was the Lord's Day, and they would gather in the temple on the Sabbath, and the next day they would gather together as believers to talk about the Lord and to worship and to sit under the teaching of the apostles, who were obviously not being invited to teach in the temple at the time. So yes, and it's just one thing after another. Now, if you move on to the next one, I'm giving you a quick rundown because I have a lot more to discuss. I don't want to bog down with this. But man, you hear this stuff and you go, what? There's a bunch of these weird deities I never heard of that all had the same story as Jesus? Like, that doesn't compute. Well, you're right. It doesn't compute, actually. Horus. Horus is supposedly born on December 25th. Well, depending on which calendar you're looking at, he was born either during August 24th through 28th, or he was born on July 15th, so in July or August. And those dates is the ones given for Horus's actual birth, not on the December 25th. Now, keep in mind, the Bible does not tell us when Jesus was born. We don't know, okay? I don't care if it was the 25th. I'll get into some reasons why they may have selected that date. But even if there was a deity that was born on the 25th, it's irrelevant to Jesus' story because it doesn't involve the date. It involves the event of his birth, not the date. He was born supposedly of a virgin. Was Horus born of a virgin? No. In fact, there's a story a little too inappropriate for me to discuss, but I'll give you a highlights of it. His father was Osiris. His mother was Isis. Osiris had been killed and ripped to pieces. His mother, Isis, used her magic to piece him back together, reanimated his body in order to copulate, and then she produced a child. This is not a virgin birth. No, not by a long shot. There's other more disgusting versions of that story, but Supposedly, Horus, there was a star in the east. There's just no source given for this. We don't know where this story came from, although I suspect it came from the same place as some other things. So it was adored by three kings. Supposedly, Horus was adored by three different kings. Now, this is interesting because the scripture does not say that Jesus was adored by three kings. No, there were three magi, or the word means wise men. They were probably well-educated counselors to a king. They showed up from the east. They worshipped Jesus, and we don't know how many there were. We know there were three gifts, and we don't know if there were three of them. And maybe later traditions gave the names and all that, and maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, but the scripture doesn't indicate this. So, but anyway, there's just no source on this either, that Horus was greeted by three kings. This just seems to be invented. Horus was supposedly a teacher at the age of 12. No, there's no source that says that. And may I remind us, Jesus wasn't a teacher at the age of 12 either. He was asking questions. We have a short little account of how he went to the temple and asked lots of questions and how they were marveled at how wise he was. But we don't see him teaching at that age, which would be fine if he was, but that's just not what the account says. Finally, he was baptized and started his ministry at the age of 30. No, there's nothing like baptism in the story of Horus. Yet this is popular media, and people repeat this over and over again, like it's just solid fact. The closest thing to baptism, Horus is associated with another deity who's the deity of embalming. Not exactly baptism. Very Egyptian, though, embalming. Well, the last one here is 12 disciples. Horus had 12 disciples. Nope. Horus had 4, quote, followers of Horus. That's what he had. He had, again, in addition to that, 16 blacksmiths. Now, it's true that 16 minus 4 equals 12. But this is not Common Core curriculum here. We're talking about how many disciples did he have. And by either count, he either had 4, 16, or 20. But he didn't have 12. Not that it would be all that significant if he happened to have 12 followers. But the point is, these are supposed to be the best examples they've got. Yeah. Finally, Dionysius. Dionysius, it said, was born of a virgin. Actually, Dionysius is a result, depending on the story you follow, of either an affair between Zeus and a princess, a human princess, or between Zeus and his daughter, Persephone. So it's one of the two. That's the result. That's how Dionysius was born. Supposedly, Dionysius was born on December 25th. There's actually no reference to a December 25th birth for Dionysius at all. There's no source on that. Supposedly, he performed miracles. And my thought here is, okay, sure. Who cares? You have a deity, you would expect to hear stories about great deeds that this deity did. However, all that Dionysius did was basically give people wine. Dionysius is the god of wine. So he gave out lots of alcohol. Now they say, Dionysius turned water into wine. So it's just like Jesus. However, in the many stories of Dionysius producing wine for people, he never once turns water into wine, which would not be terribly significant if he did, but he didn't. And it's notable that these internet attacks come at the expense of just truth. Supposedly he is the king of kings. No. There's two problems with this. One is that Dionysius is not that type of god. That would be like the Zeus or, the king of the gods sort of type character, way up there in the pantheon. Dionysius is the god of wine, right? Party, revelry, this sort of thing. There wouldn't be the appropriate title for Dionysius anyways, but also there's no source. Dionysius is never called this. And finally, or second to last, Alpha and Omega, there's no source on that either. And Dionysius was resurrected. There was a resurrection. There's actually a really strange account of Dionysius, and you could call this a resurrection. This will show you how sometimes they take these comparisons to Jesus that are really far off, like insultingly far off, and then they ignore all the details and just go, yeah, see, it's like the same. So Dionysius, there's a strange account how he was ripped apart because Hera was mad about Dionysius, was ripped apart by the Titans, and how his heart was then taken and put inside, turned, and the heart was the only thing that was left, was taken, created into like a seed, and then that was put inside of a new mother, so then he had a second birth. Not exactly the death 3 days later resurrection account of Jesus that we're looking at here. It's just very far off. It's just weird kind of mythical stuff that you expect. In fact, the earliest accounts of this death and then the heart and all this weird stuff actually post-date Christianity. And this is the case. A lot of times the similarities between these other religions and Christianity had that quality before. And they actually post-date. And if there's any borrowing, it appears as though it was the popularity of Christianity that was then being borrowed from by these other religious groups. Christianity actually is more of the stalwart, we will not change, we will not compromise, we will not stop or add or take away type of group. Because this is a controversial issue, and the whole if it bleeds, it leads kind of mentality that people have in news and in media, it's a lot easier to spread a lie that's inflammatory than it is to give people the boring truth. And that's what happens. You know, they say a lie's halfway around the world when the truth is just getting out of bed. That seems to be the way it is. So